Bear cub was found trapped in concrete. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning mist hung low over Pine Ridge, a small village nestled between rolling hills and ancient forest. Olivia Bennett stood by her kitchen window, gently rocking her 10-month-old daughter, Luna, while sipping her lukewarm coffee. The construction site across from their cottage had been abandoned for weeks, concrete mixers and tools scattered like forgotten toys. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the breeze, a half-hearted warning to stay away. "Look at the birds, Luna," Olivia whispered, pointing to a cluster of sparrows hopping along the edge of the forest. Luna's wide blue eyes followed her mother's finger, her tiny hands clapping with delight. Deep within the woods, just beyond where human eyes could see, a mother bear led her cubs through a patch of wild berries. The smallest cub, whom the forest rangers had nicknamed Maple for the distinctive maple leaf pattern on her chest, lagged behind her siblings. While the others followed their mother obediently, Maple's curious nature often led her astray. A butterfly with brilliant blue wings fluttered past Maple's nose. Without hesitation, she veered off the path, ignoring her mother's warning growl. The butterfly danced just beyond reach, leading her through tangles of underbrush and over fallen logs toward the edge of the forest and the village beyond. Back at the Bennett cottage, Olivia placed Luna in her playpen. "Mommy needs to fold the laundry, sweet pea. Be good for a few minutes." She kissed Luna's forehead and hurried upstairs, leaving the kitchen window cracked open to let in the spring breeze. Luna babbled to herself, arranging colorful blocks into wobbly towers. A sudden movement outside caught her attention. Something small and brown emerged from the tree line, moving cautiously toward the construction site. Luna pressed her face against the mesh of her playpen, watching intently as Maple ventured into the unfamiliar territory. The cub sniffed the air, drawn by the faint scent of discarded sandwich wrappers left by workers weeks ago. Her tiny paws left prints in the soft dirt as she approached the site. Warning signs meant nothing to the curious cub, who squeezed under the caution tape without a second thought. In the center of the site stood a shallow pit filled with leftover concrete that had never completely hardened. Recent rains had softened the surface, creating a deceptive crust that looked solid but wasn't. Maple approached the edge, sniffing curiously at the strange gray substance. Luna's blocks lay forgotten as she watched the fuzzy creature explore. Something about the scene made her heart beat faster, an instinctive understanding that danger lurked nearby. The cub took one cautious step onto what she thought was solid ground. For a moment she stood triumphantly on the concrete surface. Then, with a sickening squelch, the crust gave way. Maple sank up to her shoulders, wet concrete closing around her like quicksand. A panicked whimper escaped the cub's throat as she struggled to free herself. With each movement, she sank deeper, the cold mixture clinging to her fur like hundreds of tiny hands pulling her down. Her cries grew more desperate, high-pitched wails that pierced the quiet morning. Luna froze at the sound. Though she couldn't understand what was happening, the cub's distress called to something primal inside her. She pulled herself to standing, gripping the edge of the playpen. For the first time ever, she managed to push herself over the top, tumbling onto the kitchen floor with a soft thud. The front door stood ajar, just enough for a determined baby to push it wider. Luna crawled with purpose, driven by the continued cries from the construction site. Behind her, the laundry machine hummed loudly upstairs, masking the sound of her escape. Maple's struggles grew weaker as exhaustion set in. The concrete had reached her neck now, its weight crushing her small body. Her mother and siblings were too far away to hear her cries. As her strength faded, she gazed helplessly toward the little human cottage where an unlikely rescuer was making her way across the dewy grass. From the forest edge, shadows moved between the trees. Something had heard the cub's desperate pleas. But would help arrive in time? And what would happen when Luna reached the trapped cub with no adults around to intervene? The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the construction site where two young lives were about to intersect in the most unexpected way. Luna's tiny hands and knees pressed against the cool morning grass as she made her determined journey toward the distressed sounds. Each movement was a victory for the 10-month-old who had never ventured outside alone before. Her favorite stuffed animal, a well-loved plush rabbit named Hoppy, dragged alongside her, clutched tightly in her small fist. The cub's cries grew weaker, more plaintive. Maple's struggles had created a terrible suction effect, pulling her deeper into the gray mixture. Her dark eyes, bright with fear, darted around desperately seeking any form of help. The concrete had now reached her chin, forcing her to stretch her neck upward to keep her muzzle clear. From the edge of the forest, a rustling sound emerged. Two village children, 12-year-old Oliver Reed and his 9-year-old sister Penny, appeared, carrying homemade fishing poles over their shoulders. They were heading toward the creek beyond the construction site, taking a shortcut they weren't supposed to use. "Did you hear that?" Penny stopped, her head tilting toward the strange sound. "It sounds like an animal crying." Oliver shrugged, more interested in getting to their fishing spot. "Probably just a bird or something. Come on, Dad said we need to be back by lunch." "No, listen," Penny insisted, her freckled face scrunching with concern. "It's coming from the construction site." Luna continued her brave crawl, unnoticed by the children. Her blue onesie was now stained with grass and dirt, but determination kept her moving forward. Something deep inside told her that the crying creature needed help, needed her. Inside the Bennett cottage, Olivia finished folding the last towel and hummed as she made her way downstairs. "Luna, sweetie, how about some apple slices?" Her voice trailed off as she reached the empty playpen. The fallen blocks and missing baby sent ice through her veins. "Luna!" Her voice rose with panic as she scanned the kitchen. The slightly open front door caught her eye, and horror washed over her. "Luna!" Outside, Oliver reluctantly followed his sister toward the source of the strange noise. They crept under the caution tape, eyes widening as they spotted the trapped cub. "Oh my God," Oliver breathed, his earlier indifference vanishing. "It's a bear cub." "It's stuck," Penny cried, taking a step closer. "We have to help it." Oliver grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Are you crazy? Where there's a cub, there's a mama bear. We need to get help. Grown-up help." Maple's eyes locked onto the children, a flicker of hope in her gaze. She tried again to free herself, but the movement only caused her to sink further. Now only her head remained above the surface, her small ears flattened with fear. "We can't just leave it," Penny argued, tears welling in her eyes. "It's going to die." As the siblings argued, neither noticed Luna approaching from the other side of the pit. The baby had reached the edge of the concrete trap, her tiny form just feet away from where Maple struggled for life. Luna sat back on her padded bottom, watching the cub with solemn curiosity. She held out Hoppy toward Maple as if offering comfort with the only method she knew. "Oh my God, there's a baby!" Penny's scream cut through the morning air. "Oliver, look!" Olivia burst from the cottage, her heart thundering as she spotted Luna at the edge of the construction site. "Luna!" No exclamation mark. She sprinted across the yard, bare feet pounding against the earth, terror giving her impossible speed. In the forest, the mother bear suddenly froze, her sensitive ears picking up her cubs' distant cries. She snorted sharply at her other cubs, a clear command to stay put, then turned and crashed through the underbrush toward the source of the distress. Luna, oblivious to the mounting danger, reached her hand toward the trapped cub. In a moment of instinctive trust, Maple stretched her neck as far as she could, her cold nose touching Luna's fingertips for the briefest moment. The connection between them was electric, primal, and pure. Two young creatures recognizing something in each other that transcended species. "Don't move, Luna," Olivia called, slowing her approach as she neared the concrete pit. "Stay very still, baby." Oliver had pulled out his phone and was frantically dialing 911. "There's a bear cub trapped in concrete at the old Wilson construction site," he reported, his voice cracking with urgency. "And there's a baby here, too." The distant sound of crashing underbrush grew louder. The mother bear was getting closer. "We need to get the baby away from there right now," Oliver whispered urgently to Penny. "If that mother bear sees her near her cub—" He didn't need to finish the thought. The consequences were too terrible to voice. Luna, sensing something important was happening, did what babies often do in moments of high emotion. She began to cry. Not little whimpers, but full-throated wails that echoed across the construction site. Strangely, her cries seemed to calm Maple, who stopped struggling and became still, as if listening intently to the baby's distress. Olivia inched closer, calculating the safest path to reach her daughter without getting too close to the trapped cub. The concrete around Maple had begun to harden in the morning sun, making her situation even more dire. From the tree line emerged a massive shape. The mother bear burst into the clearing, her dark eyes immediately locking onto her trapped cub. She rose onto her hind legs, towering 7 feet tall, and let out a roar that seemed to shake the ground itself. Time seemed to freeze, as human and animal eyes met across the construction site. Olivia stood paralyzed between her baby and the massive bear, knowing any sudden movement could trigger an attack. But in that frozen moment, something unexpected happened. Luna, hearing the mother bear's roar, stopped crying and turned her tear-streaked face toward the massive animal. She held up Hoppy, extending the stuffed rabbit toward the bear as if making an offering of peace. The mother bear dropped to all fours, her massive head lowering as she assessed this strange situation. Her nostrils flared, taking in the sense of concrete, human, and her cub's fear. No one moved, no one breathed. The next few seconds would determine whether this encounter ended in tragedy or miracle. From the road came the distant wail of sirens. Help was on the way, but would it arrive in time? And in the concrete pit, Maple's strength was failing. Her small body trembled with exhaustion as she fought to keep her nose above the hardening surface. Her eyes began to close, consciousness slipping away despite her mother's presence. Luna, with the intuition that sometimes seems magical in small children, sensed the cub's fading strength. She did something that made everyone's heart stop. She tossed Hoppy directly toward the trapped cub. The stuffed rabbit landed just inches from Maple's nose. The soft, familiar scent of baby powder and home wafted from the toy, stirring something in the cub's fading awareness. With what seemed like her last reserve of strength, Maple nuzzled against the stuffed animal. The simple act appeared to give her comfort in what might be her final moments. The mother bear watched, her massive body tense but unmoving. It was as if she understood, on some primal level, that these humans, this small human in particular, were trying to help, not harm. "Luna, sweetheart," Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Don't move. Mommy's coming." But fate had other plans for this unusual gathering, as the construction site was about to become the stage for an even more unexpected development. From the direction of the village, a battered pickup truck careened onto the scene, gravel spraying as it skidded to a stop. The door flung open, and out stepped a weathered figure that few in Pine Ridge expected to see. Emmett Crawford, the reclusive former wildlife ranger who had disappeared from public life years ago after a tragedy few dared to mention. Emmett Crawford stood frozen for a moment, taking in the scene before him. The trapped cub, the massive mother bear, the terrified humans, and most improbably the small baby sitting calmly at the edge of disaster. His weathered face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes, sharp and alert despite his 65 years, assessed the situation with practiced precision. "Nobody move," he commanded, his voice low and gravelly from years of disuse. "Not an inch." Olivia, still poised to rush toward Luna, felt tears of frustration stream down her face. "That's my baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, I need to get to my baby." Emmett's gaze softened slightly as it met hers. "I understand, ma'am, but a sudden movement now could trigger the mother bear. We need to be smart about this." The mother bear shifted her weight, massive paws leaving deep impressions in the soft earth. Her dark eyes never left her struggling cub, but her ears flicked toward the humans, monitoring their every sound. Steam rose from her nostrils in the cool morning air as she huffed, a warning that her patience was limited. "I know this bear," Emmett said quietly, reaching slowly into his truck bed. "She's been tagged by the Forest Service. They call her Willow." From the truck, he carefully withdrew a long metal pole with a loop at the end, a snare pole used in wildlife rescue. With deliberate slowness, he reached back in for a folded tarp and what looked like a first aid kit specifically designed for animals. Oliver and Penny stood motionless, their fishing plans forgotten. "How did you know to come?" Oliver asked, his voice barely audible. Emmett pulled a handheld radio from his belt. "I monitor the emergency frequencies. Old habits." The sirens grew louder, and Emmett's expression darkened. "Too much noise will make this worse. We don't have time to wait." Luna, seemingly oblivious to the danger, had begun to pat the ground near the concrete pit, babbling softly as if trying to comfort the trapped cub. Remarkably, the mother bear had not charged, though every muscle in her massive body remained tense, ready to defend her offspring at the slightest provocation. "That bear remembers me," Emmett said, more to himself than the others. 3 years ago, I removed a porcupine quill from her paw. Animals don't forget kindness or cruelty." With calculated movements, he removed his worn leather jacket and draped it over the snare pole, creating an improvised barrier. "The baby is our priority, but we can save the cub, too. I need your help," he addressed Oliver. "When I give the signal, I want you to very slowly approach the baby from behind. No sudden movements. Stay low to the ground." Oliver swallowed hard but nodded, his young face set with determination. "What about the mother bear?" Penny whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "I'll handle Willow," Emmett replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She and I have an understanding." In the concrete pit, Maple's situation had grown dire. Only her muzzle remained above the surface, her small body now completely encased in the hardening mixture. Her eyes had taken on a glazed quality, consciousness fading as oxygen became harder to obtain. Luna, as if sensing the cub's fading strength, suddenly slapped her hands against the ground, making a sharp noise that caused everyone to flinch. But instead of provoking an attack, the sound seemed to galvanize the cub, who blinked and struggled weakly once more. "That baby," Emmett murmured, watching Luna with newfound respect. "She's keeping the cub awake." smart. A police cruiser appeared at the edge of the property, but Emmett waved frantically for them to stop and cut their sirens. Thankfully, the officer complied, approaching on foot with a hand on his holspin. "Crawford?" The officer, a young man named Deputy Jensen, looked shocked to see the notorious recluse. "What are you doing here?" "Saving lives," Emmett replied curtly. "Keep your distance and your weapon holstered. We have a situation that requires delicacy, not firepower." Jensen took in the scene, his face paling when he spotted Luna so close to the mother bear. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "I'll call for backup and—" "No," Emmett cut him off. "More people will only make this worse. I need you to block the road. Keep everyone back." For a moment, authority hung in the balance, the young deputy clearly reluctant to cede control to the disgraced former ranger. Then Willow huffed again, a sound that sent primal fear through everyone present. And Jensen nodded quickly. "You've got 10 minutes, Crawford. Then we do this by the book." As Jensen retreated to secure the perimeter, Emmett turned his attention back to the crisis at hand. He began to hum softly, a low, melodic sound that seemed odd in the tense situation. To everyone's amazement, the mother bear's posture relaxed slightly, her massive head tilting as if listening. "I used to sing to the orphaned cubs at the Wildlife Center," Emmett explained quietly. "These woods are full of bears that know my voice." With the mother bear momentarily calmed, he nodded to Oliver. "Now, son, slow and steady." Oliver dropped to his hands and knees, mimicking Luna's position, and began to inch toward the baby from behind. A sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air, his young heart pounding so loudly he was certain the bear could hear it. Luna, still focused on the trapped cub, remained unaware of Oliver's approach. She had begun to toss small pebbles near the pit, each tiny splash drawing the cub's attention, keeping Maple conscious through sheer force of will. "That's it," Emmett encouraged Oliver in a whisper. "You're doing great." Olivia watched with her hand pressed against her mouth, torn between maternal terror and desperate hope. Each second seemed to stretch into eternity as Oliver crept closer to her daughter. Meanwhile, Emmett had begun to edge toward the mother bear, still humming that strange, soothing melody. In his left hand, he held the snare pole. In his right, an open jar of what appeared to be honey. "What are you doing?" Penny gasped, unable to believe the old man was deliberately approaching the massive predator. "Creating a diversion," Emmett replied without taking his eyes off Willow. "Bears have excellent noses but divided attention. If she focuses on me and the honey, she might not notice when we move her cub." It was a desperate gamble, and everyone knew it. One misstep, one wrong move, and the situation could turn deadly in seconds. Oliver had nearly reached Luna. Just 3 more feet, and he could grab her to safety. But as he extended his hand, his elbow dislodged a small rock, which tumbled down the slight incline and splashed into the concrete around Maple. The mother bear's head snapped toward the sound, her eyes locking onto Oliver's frozen form. A deep growl rumbled from her chest, vibrating the very air around them. Time seemed to stop. Then Luna did something extraordinary. She looked up at the mother bear and laughed. A bright, bubbling sound of pure joy that cut through the tension like sunshine through storm clouds. The incongruity of the sound, this expression of delight in the midst of mortal danger, seemed to confuse the mother bear. Her growl subsided, replaced by a curious chuffing sound. "Don't waste this chance," Emmett urged Oliver. "Get the baby now." With a surge of courage, Oliver lunged forward and scooped Luna into his arms. The baby squawked in surprise, dropping Hoppy in the process. The stuffed rabbit tumbled into the concrete pit, landing directly on Maple's nearly submerged head. Oliver scrambled backward, clutching Luna to his chest. The moment he was clear, Olivia rushed forward to reclaim her child, sobbing with relief as she crushed Luna to her chest. But the crisis was far from over. The mother bear, seeing movement so close to her cub, let out a roar that seemed to shake the trees themselves. She dropped to all fours, her massive shoulders bunching as she prepared to charge. Emmett stepped directly into her path, his arms spread wide. "Willow, no!" he commanded, his voice carrying an authority that came from decades in the wilderness. Incredibly, the bear hesitated, her enormous head swinging between the humans and her trapped cub, caught in an impossible choice between attack and restraint. In that moment of indecision, Emmett made his move. With surprising agility for a man his age, he dropped to his knees beside the concrete pit and thrust the snare pole toward Maple. The loop settled around the cub's nearly submerged head, providing a lifeline. "I need help," he called. "The concrete's nearly set." Deputy Jensen, who had been watching from a distance, holstered his weapon and rushed forward. Together, he and Emmett began to pull against the suction of the concrete, trying to free the cub before it was too late. The mother bear paced back and forth, agitated but remarkably not attacking. It was as if some memory of Emmett, some past interaction, was staying her natural protective instincts. "It's not working," Jensen grunted, his uniform soaked with sweat. "She's stuck solid." "We need to break the concrete around her," Emmett decided. "There's a pickaxe in my truck bed." Penny, seeing her chance to help, darted toward the pickup. She returned moments later with the tool, her small face set with determination as she dragged it across the ground. The arrival of the pickaxe agitated the mother bear further. She huffed and swatted the air, clearly reaching the limits of her tolerance. "We need a distraction," Emmett muttered. "Something to keep Willow occupied while we free the cub." That's when Luna, still in her mother's arms, began to sing, or rather, to make a sing-song babbling that bore only a passing resemblance to actual music. She waved her tiny hands in the air, conducting an invisible orchestra, her face bright with innocent joy. The mother bear froze, her massive head tilting in confusion at this small creature's strange behavior. "Keep doing that," Emmett urged Olivia. "Whatever she's doing, it's working. Bears are curious by nature. She's never heard anything like this before." Olivia nodded and began to bounce Luna gently, encouraging her impromptu concert. Luna responded by increasing the volume of her happy babbling, clearly delighted to be the center of attention. While Willow remained distracted, Emmett and Jensen worked feverishly with the pickaxe, carefully breaking away the concrete around Maple's small body. It was painstaking work. One wrong move could injure the cub further, but time was running out. "I can see her shoulders now," Jensen reported, his earlier reluctance replaced by focused determination. "The concrete hasn't fully hardened underneath." More emergency vehicles had arrived at the perimeter, their lights flashing silently. A team from Animal Control waited for Jensen's signal, tranquilizer guns at the ready should the situation deteriorate. "Tell them to stand down," Emmett growled. "A tranquilizer dart takes minutes to work. In that time, an angry mother bear could kill us all." The work continued, minute by agonizing minute, as Luna's strange serenade kept Willow in a state of puzzled tolerance. Bit by bit, they freed Maple's body from the concrete prison, revealing matted fur coated in gray sludge. "She's breathing," Emmett announced, relief evident in his voice as he finally pulled the cub free. "But she's weak. Hypothermia from the cold concrete may be shock too." Willow sensed the change immediately. She rose onto her hind legs again, her massive frame towering over them all, eyes fixed on her cub in Emmett's arms. "This is the dangerous part," Emmett said, his voice steady despite the mortal danger. "Jensen, get everyone back to the vehicles. I need to return this cub to her mother." "You can't be serious," Jensen protested. "That bear will tear you apart the moment you get close." But Emmett's expression brooked no argument. "I've known Willow since she was a cub herself. There's a history here you don't understand." As the others retreated, Emmett carefully wrapped Maple in the tarp he'd brought, rubbing the cub's body gently to stimulate circulation. The cub whimpered weakly, her eyes fluttering as consciousness returned. Then, with a courage that left even the most hardened emergency responders in awe, Emmett began to walk slowly toward the mother bear, the rescued cub cradled in his arms. "Come on, girl," he murmured to Willow. "Remember me. Remember how I helped you once before." The mother bear dropped to all fours, her posture tense but not aggressive. She sniffed the air cautiously, catching the scent of her cub mixed with concrete and human. 10 feet apart, 5 feet, 3. From her mother's arms, Luna suddenly called out again, a high-pitched squeal that drew the mother bear's attention momentarily away from Emmett. In that brief window, Emmett knelt and gently placed Maple on the ground before backing away with deliberate slowness. For several heartbeats, no one moved. Maple lay still on the tarp, her small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Then, with infinite gentleness that belied her enormous size, Willow approached her cub. She sniffed Maple thoroughly, nudging her with her nose, seemingly checking for injuries. Satisfied that her baby was alive, she looked up, not at Emmett, but directly at Olivia and Luna. What happened next would become the stuff of Pine Ridge legend for generations to come. The massive bear dipped her head in what could only be described as a bow, a gesture so deliberate that even the most skeptical onlooker could not dismiss it as a coincidence. Then, with surprising delicacy, she picked up Maple by the scruff of her neck. But instead of immediately retreating to the forest, she padded over to where Hoppy lay discarded on the ground, covered in drying concrete. Using her massive paw with unexpected dexterity, she pushed the stuffed rabbit toward Olivia and Luna. The message was unmistakable, a trade, her cub for the toy that had provided comfort in Maple's darkest moment. Luna reached for the concrete-encrusted bunny, babbling happily, as if she perfectly understood this exchange between species. Olivia, too overwhelmed to speak, simply nodded her thanks through tears. With her cub secure, Willow gave one final look at the assembled humans, her gaze lingering longest on Emmett. Then she turned and lumbered toward the forest, Maple dangling safely from her powerful jaws. As the bear disappeared into the tree line, the tension broke like a fever. Deputy Jensen let out a long breath. "In 20 years on the force, I've never seen anything like that." Emmett merely nodded, his weathered face unreadable. Bears are smarter than people give them credit for, and they never forget a kindness. Oliver and Penny stood with their arms around each other, the fishing trip forgotten in the wake of the morning's extraordinary events. "Is the cub going to be okay?" Penny asked, her voice small with concern. "Willow will take care of her," Emmett assured her. "Bears are remarkable mothers. She'll clean the concrete off before it can harden further and keep her warm. Maple's young. She'll recover." The crisis passed. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving everyone shaky and emotional. Olivia couldn't stop kissing Luna's face, leaving tear streaks on her baby's chubby cheeks. But amidst the relief, questions remained. How had Emmett known to come? What was the tragedy that had driven him into seclusion? And how had a 10-month-old baby understood exactly what to do to save a dying bear cub? As emergency workers packed up their equipment and curious neighbors were turned away, Deputy Jensen approached Emmett, who was quietly loading his tools back into his truck. "Crawford," he began awkwardly, "I owe you an apology. If you hadn't shown up when you did—" Emmett waved away the words. "No need. You were doing your job." He closed the truck's tailgate with a decisive thud. "I'll be going now." "Wait," Olivia called, stepping forward with Luna still clutched to her chest. "I don't even know how to thank you. You saved my daughter's life. And the cubs." A shadow passed over Emmett's weathered features. "No thanks necessary, ma'am. Just doing what needed to be done." He turned to leave, but Luna suddenly reached out her small hands toward him, making demanding grabbing motions that all parents recognize. The universal baby sign for "pick me up." Emmett froze, something raw and vulnerable flashing across his face so quickly it might have been imagined. With obvious reluctance, he stepped closer, allowing Luna to grab one of his calloused fingers in her tiny fist. "She likes you," Olivia said softly. "She's usually shy with strangers." "Children and animals," Emmett murmured. "They see things we don't." Luna babbled something incomprehensible, her bright eyes fixed on Emmett's face with an intensity that seemed beyond her years. Whatever she was trying to communicate made the old ranger's breath catch. "Would you like to come back to the house?" Olivia offered impulsively. "For coffee or breakfast?" "It's the least I can do." Emmett gently disentangled his finger from Luna's grip. "Thank you, but no. I don't do well with people these days." He glanced toward the forest where Willow had disappeared. "The bears are easier." Before anyone could press further, he climbed into his truck and started the engine. Through the dusty windshield, his eyes met Olivia's one last time, a look that contained volumes of unspoken history. Then he was gone, the truck bouncing down the rutted road toward the more remote parts of Pine Ridge, where his isolated cabin reportedly stood. As Olivia carried Luna back to their cottage, the baby's head heavy with exhaustion on her shoulder, Deputy Jensen fell into step beside them. "You should know," he said quietly, "what happened to Crawford. Everyone in town knows the story, but you're new here, aren't you?" Olivia nodded. "We moved in just 3 months ago. I wanted a quieter place to raise Luna after my husband." She trailed off, the wound still too fresh. Jensen nodded understanding. "Crawford was the best wildlife ranger this county ever had. 25 years with the Forest Service, specialized in bear rehabilitation. They called him the Bear Whisperer." "What happened to him?" Jensen's face grew somber. 5 years ago, there was a family camping in the North Woods. Father, mother, twin daughters, about 7 years old. They left food out, didn't secure their trash. A problem bear came in the night. Olivia's arms tightened instinctively around Luna. Crawford was called in to track the bear. Standard procedure, after an attack, the animal has to be put down. But when he found it, he discovered it was a bear he'd rehabilitated years before. A bear that knew him, trusted him. "Willow?" Olivia guessed. Jensen shook his head. "No, a male bear called Thunder. The story goes that Crawford couldn't pull the trigger. He radioed in that he couldn't find the bear, but another ranger spotted it the next day when they realized Crawford had lied." He shrugged. "He was fired, his pension reduced, but that wasn't what broke him." "What was it then?" 2 weeks later, the same bear attacked another campsite. This time, it was a young mother and her baby. Olivia felt sick. "Did they?" "The mother survived. The baby didn't." Jensen's voice was flat with old grief. It was Crawford's sister and nephew. He blamed himself, said if he'd done his job, they'd still be alive. After the funeral, he disappeared into that cabin and barely comes out except for supplies. Today's the first time most of us have seen him in years." The weight of the tragedy settled over them as they reached Olivia's front door. She looked back toward the distant forest, thinking of Emmett in his self-imposed exile, and Willow with her rescued cub. Maybe today was a step toward forgiveness, she suggested quietly. For him, I mean. Jensen smiled sadly. "Maybe so, ma'am. This town could use more moments like today, when things go right instead of wrong." As he tipped his hat and turned to leave, Olivia carried Luna inside. The baby was already drifting to sleep, her small body limp with exhaustion after the morning's excitement. "My brave, impossible girl," Olivia whispered, laying Luna in her crib. "How did you know what to do? How did you understand?" Luna's eyes fluttered open briefly, a mysterious smile crossing her face before sleep claimed her completely. In her tiny fist, she still clutched a small piece of the ruined Hoppy, a concrete-covered ear that had broken off during the rescue. Outside the window, at the edge of the forest that bordered their property, a shadow moved briefly among the trees. Larger than a man, smaller than an adult bear. It lingered for just a moment, watching the cottage with keen interest before melting back into the wilderness. The morning's events had created unlikely connections between human and animal, between tragedy and hope. But as the afternoon sun rose high over Pine Ridge, no one suspected that this remarkable rescue was just the beginning of an even more extraordinary story, one that would change their small community forever. 3 days passed since the dramatic rescue at the construction site. The local newspaper, the Pine Ridge Gazette, ran the story on its front page. Baby and recluse. Ranger save bear cub from concrete death. Accompanying the headline was a blurry photo taken by one of the emergency responders, showing Emmett Crawford kneeling before the mother bear with the rescued cub in his arms. It was an image of such unlikely courage that it had already been shared thousands of times online, bringing unwanted attention to the small village. In the Bennett cottage, Olivia sat in the kitchen, staring at the newspaper while Luna played on a blanket nearby. The baby seemed unchanged by her adventure, babbling happily to a replacement stuffed animal, a plush bear that Penny and Oliver had brought as a gift. The concrete-encrusted remains of Hoppy sat on the windowsill, too damaged to be cleaned, but too meaningful to throw away. "What am I going to do with you?" Olivia murmured, watching her daughters stack blocks with unusual focus for a child her age. 10 months old and already running toward bears instead of away from them. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Penny standing on the porch, her freckled face solemn. "Hi, Mrs. Bennett. Is Luna okay for a visit?" The girl clutched a small wicker basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Of course, Penny, and please call me Olivia." She stepped aside to let the child enter. "Luna's been perfectly fine, acting like nothing unusual happened at all." Penny knelt beside Luna, who immediately reached for her with a delighted squeal. "I brought something," she said, setting down the basket. "Mom and I made muffins for you and—" She hesitated, glancing uncertainly at Olivia. "I found something weird at the edge of the forest this morning. I thought you should see it." From the basket, she carefully withdrew a crudely fashioned object. A small doll made from twigs bound together with strands of what appeared to be bear fur. Where the face should be was a smooth, polished river stone with markings that resembled a crude smile. "What is that?" Olivia asked, taking the strange object. "I don't know," Penny admitted. "I found it right at the tree line behind your house. It was sitting on a flat rock like it was left there on purpose." Olivia turned the twig doll over in her hands. Despite its primitive construction, there was something oddly appealing about it, something that spoke of careful craftsmanship despite the simple materials. Luna, spotting the strange toy, immediately reached for it with demanding hands and a stream of enthusiastic babble. "She wants it," Penny observed, smiling. "Maybe it's for her." Olivia hesitated, an inexplicable unease settling over her. "I don't know if she should play with this. We don't know where it came from." As if in answer, Luna's babbling suddenly formed a recognizable word, her first. "Bear," she said clearly, tiny fingers stretching toward the twig doll. "Bear." Olivia nearly dropped the doll in shock. "Did she just... Bear?" Luna repeated, her face lighting up with triumph at being understood. "Bear." Penny clapped her hands. "Her first word. Oh my gosh, that's so cool." But Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spring breeze coming through the open door. Luna had never seen a real bear before the incident at the construction site. Of all the words she could have chosen for her first, Mama, Dada, even the name of her beloved stuffed rabbit, why that one? Her thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of the vehicles, multiple engines growing louder as they approached the village. "What's that?" Penny asked, moving to the window. From their vantage point, they could see a small convoy making its way down the main road, 3 black SUVs with government plates, followed by a white van with a satellite dish mounted on top. "Trouble," Olivia murmured, instinctively moving to pick up Luna. The story's gotten attention. The procession stopped in the village center. Men and women in official-looking attire emerged from the SUVs, while a news crew spilled from the van, equipment in hand. Even from a distance, Olivia could see Deputy Jensen intercept them, his posture tense. "I should go home," Penny said, sounding worried. "Mom doesn't like reporters. She says they're worse than bears." After the girl departed, Olivia closed the door and drew the curtains, an inexplicable anxiety settling over her. She looked down at the twig doll still clutched in her hand, and then at Luna, who was watching her with unnervingly focused eyes. "Bear," Luna said again, softer this time, almost like a secret. Olivia placed the strange doll on a high shelf out of Luna's reach. The baby immediately protested with indignant cries. "Not now, sweetheart," Olivia soothed, gathering Luna into her arms. "Something doesn't feel right about all this." As she paced the living room, trying to quiet Luna's protests, Olivia's mind returned to Emmett Crawford. After leaving the construction site, he had disappeared back to his isolated cabin. She wondered how he was handling the sudden notoriety, whether those government vehicles were looking for him, what questions they might ask about his unusual relationship with the local wildlife. Making a sudden decision, Olivia packed a diaper bag and strapped Luna into her car seat. They would take the back roads and avoid the village center entirely. She needed answers, and only one person could provide them. Deep in the forest, in a ravine inaccessible to all but the most experienced hikers, Willow tended to her cubs in the den she had created beneath a fallen oak. The 3 healthy cubs played and wrestled, their fur shining with health and vitality. Maple, still weak from her ordeal, rested against her mother's warm flank, the concrete residue now mostly cleaned from her fur through Willow's persistent grooming. But they were not alone. Seated on a rock at the edge of the clearing, a figure watched the bear family with intense interest. Clad in deerskin and forest colors that blended perfectly with the surrounding foliage, the watcher might have been a figment of imagination, a spirit of the forest given human form. Only when the figure moved did the illusion break, revealing a woman of indeterminate age. Her dark hair hung in a single braid down her back, threaded with feathers and small bones. Around her neck hung a pouch of worn leather, from which she occasionally withdrew herbs to crush between her fingers, releasing scents that kept Willow calm and accepting of her presence. The woman's weathered hands worked methodically, weaving twigs and bear fur into a small figure. With practiced movements, she attached a stone for a face, using berry juice to paint simple features. When her work was complete, she studied it with critical eyes, then nodded once in satisfaction. Rising with the fluid grace of one accustomed to moving silently through the wilderness, she approached the bear family. Willow raised her massive head, acknowledging the woman with a soft chuff of recognition. The healthy cubs retreated behind their mother, but Maple, to the woman's obvious approval, sniffed the air curiously and took a tentative step forward. "You remember," the woman murmured, her voice rough from disuse. "You remember the human child who gave you comfort." She knelt and placed the twig doll before the cub, who sniffed it thoroughly before gently batting it with her paw. The woman nodded, as if this was exactly the response she had hoped for. "It has begun," she said to Willow. "After all these years, the connection is re-established. The child with the old soul has come to Pine Ridge." Rising, she brushed pine needles from her deerskin clothes and retrieved the twig doll, now bearing the scent of the bear cub. With a respectful nod to Willow, she backed away from the den and disappeared into the forest, moving with the confidence of one who knew every root and stone of these woods. She had a delivery to make. Emmett Crawford's cabin stood in a remote clearing, accessible only by a deeply rutted dirt track that most vehicles couldn't navigate. It was a sturdy structure of logs and stone, built with the skill of a man who understood the forest's moods. A wide porch wrapped around three sides, offering views of the surrounding wilderness. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, scenting the air with the aroma of burning pine. As Olivia's car struggled up the final incline, she questioned her decision to come. Emmett clearly valued his privacy. What right did she have to intrude? But Luna had said her first word, and something about that strange doll left on their property compelled her to seek out the one person who might understand. She parked beside Emmett's battered pickup and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. In the back seat, Luna had fallen asleep, her small face peaceful in repose. Before Olivia could open her door, the cabin door swung open. Emmett stood on the porch, a shotgun held loosely at his side. His expression was unwelcoming, but not hostile. "Mrs. Bennet," he called, just loud enough to be heard. "You're a long way from the village." Olivia stepped out of the car, leaving Luna sleeping for the moment. "I'm sorry to intrude, Mr. Crawford. I wouldn't have come if it wasn't important." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Coffee's hot. Bring the child inside if you must, but this isn't a place meant for visitors." The interior of the cabin was surprisingly bright and clean, with large windows capturing the forest light. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on wildlife, biology, and native folklore. A drafting table stood in one corner, covered with detailed sketches of bears in various poses, the talent evident in every line. "You're an artist," Olivia observed, settling Luna, still sleeping, on a worn but comfortable couch. "Just field sketches," Emmett replied gruffly, pouring coffee into two mismatched mugs. "Habit from my ranger days, helps me track behavioral patterns." He handed her a mug and gestured for her to sit at a wooden table that bore the marks of years of use. "What brings you up here, Mrs. Bennet? The reporters downtown not asking enough questions?" "I'm avoiding them," she admitted. "And please, call me Olivia." She wrapped her hands around the warm mug, finding comfort in its heat. "Something strange happened this morning, and I thought, well, after what you did at the construction site, I thought you might understand." Emmett's weathered face revealed nothing, as she told him about the twig doll left near their property, and Luna's first word. He listened without interruption, his eyes occasionally drifting to the sleeping child. When she finished, he sat in silence for several moments before speaking. "There are stories in these mountains," he finally said, his voice low. "Old stories that most folks dismiss as superstition. But when you've spent as many years as I have in these woods, you learn that not everything has a rational explanation." "What kind of stories?" Olivia pressed, sensing his reluctance. Emmett rose and moved to a bookshelf, withdrawing a leather-bound volume that looked ancient, its spine cracked with age. The original inhabitants of this valley, the Shoshone, believed that certain children were born with the ability to communicate with animals. Not in words, exactly, but in a deeper way, soul to soul. He placed the book on the table, opened to a page with a faded illustration of a small child surrounded by woodland creatures. They called these children Nibikeu, spirit talkers. According to legend, these children could bridge the gap between human and animal worlds, bringing understanding where there was fear. Olivia stared at the illustration, then at Luna, still peacefully sleeping. "You can't seriously think—" "I don't know what to think," Emmett interrupted, "but I've spent my life observing bears, and what happened at that construction site wasn't normal behavior. That mother bear should have attacked when she saw her cub in danger. Instead, she held back. And the way your daughter responded, keeping the cub alert, offering her toy, it wasn't typical infant behavior." A small sound from the couch drew their attention. Luna was awake, her blue eyes immediately finding and fixing on Emmett with unnerving intensity. "Bear," she said clearly, stretching her arms toward him. Emmett's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. "Has she called anyone else that?" Olivia shook her head. "Just you, apparently." The old ranger's expression softened slightly as he regarded the child. "Maybe she associates me with the bear she saw. Children make simple connections." But his tone suggested he didn't entirely believe this explanation. He set down his mug and approached Luna cautiously, as if she were a wild creature that might flee if startled. To Olivia's surprise, her normally shy daughter showed no fear. Instead, she reached for Emmett with obvious delight. "She likes you," Olivia said, echoing her words from the construction site. "Children and animals," Emmett murmured, the same response as before, but this time with a hint of wonder. A sudden knocking at the door broke the moment. Emmett's posture immediately tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward the shotgun propped against the wall. "Are you expecting someone?" Olivia whispered, gathering Luna protectively against her chest. "No one comes here without invitation," he replied grimly, moving toward the door with the caution of a man accustomed to unwelcome surprises. Through the window, Olivia caught a glimpse of one of the black SUVs she had seen in the village. Men in dark suits stood on the porch, their expressions professionally neutral. Emmett hesitated, then opened the door just wide enough to block entry with his body. "Can I help you, gentlemen? Emmett Crawford?" The taller of the two men held up an identification badge. "Agent Wilson, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is Agent Morales. We'd like to ask you some questions about the incident with the bear cub 3 days ago." "Not much to tell beyond what was in the paper," Emmett replied, making no move to invite them in. "We understand you have a history with the bear in question," Agent Wilson pressed. "A female tagged as WF-247, locally known as Willow. Our records show you were involved in her rehabilitation as a cub 15 years ago." Emmett's knuckles whitened on the doorframe. "Your records are thorough." We're conducting an assessment of unusual ursine behavior in the Pine Ridge area, Agent Morales explained, his tone carefully neutral. There have been reports of bears displaying atypical social patterns, particularly around human settlements. Bears are intelligent animals, Emmett replied flatly. They adapt to their environment. Perhaps, Wilson acknowledged. But our concern is whether these adaptations pose a risk to the public. The incident with your sister 5 years ago, that's enough. Emmett's voice hardened to steel. My sister's tragedy has nothing to do with the current situation. Willow is not the bear that attacked her. The agents exchanged glances, and Wilson continued with careful precision. Actually, Mr. Crawford, that's part of why we're here. New DNA analysis of the samples taken from the incident suggests that we may have misidentified the bear responsible. The genetic markers indicate— I don't want to hear it. Emmett cut him off, his face pale beneath his weathered tan. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. That case is closed. With all due respect, sir, Morales interjected, emerging evidence suggests that the bear you refused to euthanize, Thunder, may not have been responsible for the second attack. The hair and saliva samples preserved from the scene were reanalyzed with new techniques and— Stop! Emmett's voice cracked with unexpected emotion. Just stop. From inside the cabin, Luna suddenly let out a wail, not her usual cry, but something deeper, more distressed. The sound momentarily distracted everyone. You have company, Wilson observed, trying to peer around Emmett's broad shoulders. A private consultation, Emmett replied coldly. If you have official business with me, make an appointment through proper channels. Otherwise, I'll ask you to leave my property. The agents retreated, but not before Wilson handed Emmett a business card. We'll be in Pine Ridge for the next week, conducting interviews and setting up monitoring stations in the forest. Your expertise would be valuable, Mr. Crawford, officially or unofficially. As the SUV disappeared down the rutted track, Emmett closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. When he turned back to Olivia, his expression was haunted. I think you should go, he said quietly. It's not safe for you and your daughter to be associated with me right now. Olivia stood, Luna still crying softly in her arms. What did they mean about misidentifying the bear? I thought your sister was— It doesn't matter. Emmett interrupted harshly. The past is past. Nothing can change what happened. But the tremor in his hands as he reached for his coffee suggested that the agent's words had shaken him to his core. Whatever new evidence they had uncovered, it clearly had the power to upend the narrative he had been living with for 5 years. As Olivia prepared to leave, gathering Luna's things, Emmett disappeared briefly into another room. He returned with a small object that he pressed into her hand, a carved wooden bear, small enough to fit in her palm, polished to a soft sheen by years of handling. For your daughter, he said gruffly. My sister's boy used to play with it when he visited. The unexpected gift left Olivia speechless. She clutched the small carving, feeling the weight of its significance. Thank you, she managed finally. Luna will treasure it. Emmett nodded once, then walked them to the car in silence. As Olivia secured Luna in her car seat, the baby's tears subsided, replaced by curious glances at their surroundings. One piece of advice, Emmett said as Olivia prepared to leave. The twig doll you found, keep it. Whatever left it for you meant no harm. In these mountains, it's best not to refuse gifts from the forest. His cryptic words stayed with Olivia as she drove carefully back down the rutted track, Luna babbling happily in the back seat. In her rearview mirror, Emmett's figure grew smaller, a solitary sentinel against the backdrop of the ancient forest. In the village, the arrival of federal agents and news crews had created a buzz of excitement and apprehension. The Pine Ridge Diner, normally quiet on weekday afternoons, was packed with locals eager to share theories and gossip about the bear rescue and the mysterious Emmett Crawford. Deputy Jensen sat at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee and a growing headache. The agents from Fish and Wildlife had peppered him with questions for over an hour about Crawford, about the bear population, about any unusual animal behavior in the area. He had answered as truthfully as he could while revealing as little as possible. Pine Ridge handled its own business. Outsiders rarely understood the complex relationships between the village and the wilderness that surrounded it. The bell above the door jingled, and heads turned as Dr. Eleanor Chen entered. As the village's only veterinarian and wildlife rehabilitation specialist, she had been fielding questions all day about bear behavior and the likelihood of the cub's survival. She slid onto the stool beside Jensen, signaling the waitress for coffee. "Your friends from Fish and Wildlife just left my clinic," she informed him quietly. "They're setting up cameras throughout the forest, supposedly to monitor migration patterns, but it feels like more than that." Jensen nodded, keeping his voice low. "They were asking about Crawford earlier, something about new DNA evidence from the attack on his sister." Eleanor's eyes widened. "After 5 years? That seems convenient." She accepted the coffee with a grateful nod to the waitress. "Did they mention why they're really here? Because a bear cub in concrete isn't enough to bring in federal agents." "They said something about unusual behavioral patterns," Jensen replied. "Bears displaying atypical social interactions with humans." Eleanor snorted. "In other words, not eating us when they have the chance?" "Something like that." Jensen glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "What do you know about Crawford's history with the local bears? Specifically the one they call Willow?" The veterinarian considered the question, her expression thoughtful. "Emmett rehabilitated Willow after her mother was killed by poachers. She was just a few months old, would have died without his intervention. He raised her with minimal human contact, taught her to forage, prepared her for release back into the wild. By all accounts, it was a textbook rehabilitation." "But," Jensen prompted, sensing there was more to the story, "but even after her release, she stayed in the area. Most rehabilitated bears wander off, establish territories away from human contact. Willow didn't. She raised multiple litters within a 5-mile radius of Crawford's cabin." Eleanor sipped her coffee. "And there were rumors, back when I first moved here, about Emmett having an unusual connection with the bears he worked with. Some called it a special touch, others—" She hesitated. "Called it what?" "Magic," she admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. "The old-timers, especially those with native heritage, said he had the old magic, the ability to speak to animals in their own language." Jensen scoffed. "You can't be serious." "I'm a scientist," Eleanor reminded him. "I deal in observable phenomena and empirical evidence, but I've also lived in Pine Ridge long enough to know that the forest holds secrets science hasn't fully explained." She leaned closer. "Did you see how that mother bear looked at the baby? At little Luna Bennett? Bears don't make eye contact with humans like that. They don't return toys or bow in gratitude. Whatever happened at that construction site goes beyond normal animal behavior." Jensen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the diner's aggressive air conditioning. "So you're saying—" "I'm saying that those agents aren't here just because of a heartwarming rescue story," Eleanor cut in. They're here because something is happening in these woods that defies easy explanation, and Emmett Crawford is at the center of it." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Oliver and Penny, who approached the counter with the boundless energy of children with news to share. "Deputy Jensen," Penny called. "We went to visit Luna today, and you won't believe what happened. She said her first word." Jensen smiled indulgently. "That's great, Penny. What did she say?" "Mama, Dada." "Bear," Oliver supplied, his expression serious. "She said bear over and over, and there was this weird doll thing that Penny found." "It was left by the forest," Penny interrupted. "Made of sticks and bear fur, with a stone face. Luna wanted it really badly." Jensen and Eleanor exchanged startled glances. "Where exactly did you find this doll?" Eleanor asked, her casual tone belied by the sudden intensity in her eyes. "On a flat rock at the edge of the trees behind the Bennett's house," Penny explained. "It was like someone left it there on purpose." "And Luna said bear when she saw it?" Jensen pressed. Penny nodded enthusiastically. Mrs. Bennett was really surprised. She said Luna had never said any words before. As the children continued chattering about their visit, Jensen and Eleanor withdrew slightly, their expressions troubled. "A twig doll left at the forest's edge," Eleanor murmured. "That sounds like folk tales and campfire stories." Jensen cut in firmly. "Let's not start seeing spirits in the shadows." But his dismissive words couldn't entirely banish the unease that settled over them. Outside the diner windows, the dense forest that surrounded Pine Ridge suddenly seemed more mysterious, more watchful than before. And as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the village, neither of them noticed the slender figure observing them from across the street, a woman in modern clothes, but with ancient eyes and a single braid threaded with feathers and small bones.